Guys, I'm sitting here reading an article on the Huffington Post that talks about a phenomenon most people aren't aware of, and that's fake balsamic vinegar. I'll include this article in the show notes so you can see what I'm talking about, but in the meantime, I'm going to read to you a few things in the article that really jumped out to me. If you think you've been scoring a deal with cheap balsamic vinegar at the grocery store, think again. Upon closer inspection, you might find that what you actually have is imitation balsamic, which is basically cheap wine vinegar with coloring added to it. This is what drives me crazy about the food industry. They're using the absolute minimum amount of real ingredients required to call it a certain food, and then they fill it with as many cheap, unhealthy fillers as they possibly can. Back to the article. They say if it's cheap, it's probably fake. The key is to look at the ingredients for the words grape must or aged grape must. So the balsamic vinegar we use here at Nature Has Flavor meets this criteria. We're not loading up our balsamic vinegar with all the fake fillers you see at grocery stores. This is restaurant quality balsamic vinegar made with real grape must. And guys, I'm telling you, using this stuff in your cooking will take your meals to a different dimension. I've mentioned this before, but this is how restaurants keep you coming back. They're using these high-quality, real ingredients that you as a consumer just don't have access to. As a result, everything tastes better, it's stronger, more pungent, and more satisfying. What we've done here at Nature Has Flavor is given the public access to these same incredibly high-end ingredients so you can take healthy food and make it taste amazing every single night. Guys, balsamic vinegar is just one ingredient. When you start using real ingredients for all of your cooking, your spices, your herbs, your red and white wine vinegars, you begin to realize that even as an inexperienced chef, you can make everything taste incredibly good. This makes healthy cooking so much easier. Our apple cider vinegar is another perfect example of this. Apple cider vinegar has all of these incredible health benefits, but there's such an unpleasant, almost burning feeling I get when I try to use the apple cider vinegar from stores. The apple cider vinegar we use here at Nature Has Flavor is so good I actually drink it by the teaspoon. It's sweet, it's powerful, it goes down so much easier. I want you guys to experience this difference for yourself. Head on over to naturehasflavor.com and try just one bottle of our balsamic vinegar, our apple cider vinegar. Guys, we've sourced everything in small batches based on quality and the personal integrity of our distributors. You're simply not going to find this quality of product packaged and readily available anywhere else. Go to naturehasflavor.com and enter the promo code REALVINEGARS. Again, that's Real Vinegars, and get 20% off your first order. How's it going, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Nature Has Flavor podcast. My name is Danny Horgan, and I'm joined in person today by two very smart people, people who are going to play a huge impact on the future of the plant-based movement, two future leaders in this movement. I'm talking about Matt Hayek and Nina Gheihman. They're both PhD students at Harvard. I'm going to introduce each one of them so you can hear their voice and you can understand who's talking when we have this conversation. Matt, why don't you introduce yourself to the Nature Has Flavor listeners?
Hi, everyone at Nature Has Flavor's listener base. I am Matt Hayek. As Danny said, I'm getting my PhD right now. It's in environmental science and engineering. I actually research greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That's what I'm doing for my doctorate. And I'm really interested in both the sustainability of what we eat and, making awesome vegan food. I love that. So yeah, here's Nina.
Hi, everybody. So as Danny said, my name is Nina Gheihman. I'm a PhD student at Harvard in sociology. My research is also about veganism. I'm comparing how veganism is growing as a movement in the US, France, and Israel. And also in my personal sort of side life, I also run a group called Boston Plant-Based Millenials, which organizes potlucks. And actually, this is a timely interview because Matt and I are both founding the Harvard Vegan Society very soon, and we're going to be organizing the Ivy League Vegan Conference at Harvard this year. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about this new Harvard Vegan Society. What exactly are you guys looking to accomplish? What are your goals with this particular project, and how close is it to getting done?
So we just started this project. There's been sort of a lot of interest in veganism in general, kind of from the environmental side, from the health side, but this is kind of, or in the animal advocacy side as well, but this has been kind of in different parts of Harvard. And there hasn't actually been a group that's existed officially at Harvard that promotes these kinds of different ideas together in one place. So there have been kind of collections of people, but not this organized effort. So we're trying to sort of start it at the Harvard-wide level, but also at the undergrad level and the graduate level. And the purpose of the group is to basically to bring these people together to create initiatives like bringing in outside speakers, like organizing social events, and also to start this conference together. So we're just about to start it now. It's kind of in the process of being formed.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. And what the Harvard Vegan Society is actually trying to do is bring people from across Harvard. I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but Harvard is not one community. It's really many communities because there are many schools doing very distinct things, very distinct work. People from the law school to the divinity school to the school of the graduate school of design. And you have all of these different people at these different schools working from their own different and unique approaches, but you have some people off in their own corners at each one of these schools who are interested in veganism or are vegan themselves or want to explore more about plant-based diet. We've gotten a fair amount of interest from non-vegans so far. Just people who want to have an interdisciplinary cross-school network and community. And what we're doing at Harvard is no less than what the Vegan Ivy Conference wants to accomplish, which is really having a far-reaching, widely interdisciplinary conference where you bring everyone together from the humanities to business to cognitive science, and get them all in one place and try to kind of elevate that conversation. So that's what we're trying to do at the Harvard Vegan Society and at the Ivy Conference in general, which is coming this March.
So what's interesting about what you guys do is the fact that you're so deep into your research. These are PhD programs. Like Matt was saying, it's taken him 7.5 years to get where he is. I don't know how you need it. I'm assuming it's a similar amount of time. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with the broader implications of a plant-based diet and what it can mean for the world. Like a lot of people still see it as, vegetarianism, which is just, oh, I'm not going to eat meat because I don't like it or something like that. This is all still relatively new. How would you describe each of your disciplines and your studies to someone who's not familiar with the plant-based movement?
Well, I just want to acknowledge here that I don't study veganism or diet directly for my PhD. I work on problems that involve greenhouse gases and climate change more broadly. But what I can say in terms of the light that environmental science can shine on this in general is that a UN report came out with some really top agricultural and environmental scientists where they found that 18% of all greenhouse gases can come from animal agriculture. 18% of all of the kind of total net warming on Earth is from cows, pigs, and sheep. And that's compared to 16%, slightly less, that comes from all of our transportation combined, all of the cars, planes, trucks, and buses on Earth. So I think, that's one way that environmental science can kind of shine a light on the co-benefits of signing up for a vegan diet, or at the very least reducing your meat and dairy consumption.
And as for me, sociologists were interested in studying sort of cultural trends, and also we're in the business of sort of explaining why certain cultural movements are developing or not. And for me personally, there's been a lot of work done sort of in animal advocacy, sort of from the law side, sort of what Matt does in terms of environmental science. But there hasn't really been any sociologists that have entered the scene. There has been a little bit of work comparing sort of animal rights movements, but I wanted to see why veganism has kind of exploded in the last 5 years. Why has it grown, especially in Israel? This is a place where I didn't really know anything about it before, but when I started kind of looking in there, and I just came back from the summer, I was in France and Israel to do preliminary interviews, and just to try to understand what is it about a particular nation or society that sort of makes it more or less open to veganism as a cultural product, as a cultural idea. And I think that in general, sociology hasn't really entered the scene at all. So I'm excited to be one of the few kind of people who are trying to understand this sociologically.
I think that's one of the coolest things about adopting a plant-based diet, a vegan diet. It doesn't really take any talent. It's just something you can do, and it's going to be great for your health. It's going to be great for the world as a whole. I think that's a pretty cool thing. There's not a lot of other things you can say that about. So let's take it back a little bit and, talk about your first week on a completely plant-based diet, what it felt like, any changes you might have felt in your health, your energy. I think a lot of people, when they have that first hit of energy, that clean health, where they're like, wow, I really feel good and it feels real. It doesn't feel like caffeine or some other jittery energy. That's enough for them to stay on a plant-based diet forever. But there are other people who will feel it and they still kind of want to go back, and, they want to dabble. And I'm only going to eat meat once or twice a week. For you guys, what was the process like? What was that first week like? And, how did you eventually transition to an entirely plant-based diet?
So I'm going to tell the story about what my actual first week looked like, because it was actually pretty interesting. It was a bit of a challenge. But just to say one more thing on the previous subject, because I remember you asked me about kind of the difference between people starting out vegetarian versus going fully vegan, is, when I mentioned how all of our livestock contribute to climate change, is, it was important for me to realize when I started going vegan that the milk industry, the dairy industry, is kind of inexorably tied to the meat industry. Because in order to keep a cow producing milk, that you have to make that cow make babies. And half that cow's babies are going to be females and half of them are going to be males. And you can't milk the males when they grow up. So you got to do something else with them. So the beef industry is the dairy industry. And that was really important recognition for me to make when I started going vegan and when I transitioned from going vegetarian, which I was only for like 9 months, to like my friends being like, oh, what are you doing? Like, that this is the case. And I was like, yeah. They were like, all right, we're all going up to this hardcore and metal festival from DC, which is where we were from, to Elizabeth, New Jersey. And dude, nothing is in Elizabeth, New Jersey. It's like, I'm really sorry to all the residents of Elizabeth, New Jersey that might be listening to this, but they might agree with me, because that town is just like, it's like shipping docks and airport hotels and stadiums and sports complexes. So we were at this like hardcore and metal festival and we had no clue what to eat. They weren't even like bringing other food vendors in for the whole first day of the festival. So we were all starving, and we found one Chinese food restaurant that made the greasiest, slimiest tofu I had ever eaten. But like, even there, it was like still okay. Like, I've had worse beef before. And I was kind of sadly gnawing through this like unsteamed broccoli and greasy tofu. I was like, you know what? If I can do this here, I can do this anywhere. And since then, I've been in like Germany and Iceland and Brazil, and I've been fine in those places because I made it through Elizabeth, New Jersey.
That's a great story. You should also mention when you started.
Oh yeah, this was like 2004. I was 19, so I've been vegan for like over 12 years now, and it's been awesome.
An inspiration for us all. For me, for my story, I have been vegetarian for 10 years. But when I turned vegetarian when I was 15, it was very much an exercise in just sort of deciding to do something without actually doing any research about it. And so I kind of thought, well, I care about animals, so I guess I'll stop eating meat. And it just never occurred to me to read anything about it. So for a long time, I was, a sociologist, I was other things, and vegetarianism was just another thing that I was, but it wasn't actually central to my identity in any salient way. And that all changed a year ago. So actually, when I moved out, I'm from Toronto originally. When I moved to the US for school, I sort of stopped buying animal products, and it wasn't even a conscientious decision. It was just sort of like, well, I'll just be vegan at home and vegetarian when I go out. And it seemed too daunting to be vegan when I went out. So it was easier to just separate my life in that way. And then I came across the China study because my grandfather had gotten sick, and I read T. Colin Campbell's book and just turned vegan on the basis of health reasons at the time. when I started actually doing research around the health reasons, I found out all the other reasons to be vegan, which are, I mean, and I realized that all the reasons that I had been vegetarian originally, which were sort of ethical motivations, you know, I really just should have been vegan from the start. And I remember that I had met vegans before in my life, but for whatever reason, I just wasn't open to that message at the time. And so I always try to strive to be the vegan that I wish I had met at the time, you know, before in my life. And so I think that for me, it was much more gradual. It took it took some weeks to become plant-based, I guess, or vegan plant-based. But I actually really did notice a huge difference in terms of, like, you were asking earlier about like energy and health. I think, I mean, it's funny because I mean, I was 24, 25. So you think you wouldn't notice a big difference, but you really do. And the difference between being meat eater and vegetarian was like minuscule. And the difference between being totally plant-based versus vegetarian was huge. Like I could just tell it was like, you know, I just stopped getting sick. I just had more energy to exercise, things like that. And obviously the ethical and environmental implications were the things that were truly driving me, but the sort of like more superficial benefits of the sort of the health were really important as well. So that's why I really recommend, I really think the difference between doing it a little bit and doing it full kind of all the way is pretty significant in my experience.
Whole hog, no pun intended. Yeah, I got to agree with that. Basically, when I went from eating meat to being vegetarian, it was like fine, but I was still eating a lot of junk food, which has like a fair amount of dairy in it, and substituting my meat with a bunch of cheese and eggs, which is like, that's still a ton of saturated fat and cholesterol for like not even as much protein. And so that 1 year where I went from meat eating to veg, and I ate a lot of meat. I like to tell people that I ate like enough meat in my first 18 years of life to compensate for a whole lifetime. Yeah, Nina's pointing at herself as well. But you know, when I went from veg to fully vegan, I was actually being forced to explore new ingredients, new ways of getting umami and savory flavors out of things like mushrooms and pan-searing Brussels sprouts and soy sauce, you know, like those really great deep hearty flavors out of vegetables, you know, in a way that really way more foundationally transformed how I feel and the energy that I had. And honestly, like that second year of college, my academic performance skyrocketed as well. And just having that much brain food to consume was really awesome.
I ate enough dairy in my first 25 years of life than most people have eaten in a lifetime. I mean, I'm Russian. Like, we used to eat dairy upon dairy upon dairy upon dairy. So, I mean, being vegetarian, I did not help the world in any way. So,
cheese is addictive, yo. I get it.
I think I actually had read a few studies about the addictive properties of cheese, which is pretty scary if you think about it. But then it kind of goes down to the fact that cheese isn't really natural. Cow's milk, not exactly the most natural thing for humans to be consuming. And I think what's interesting about Matt's story in particular is that he was 18, 19 years old when he made the switch. And at that age, you feel great all the time, no matter what. So the fact that he felt the difference just from making that switch at that age, I think that should definitely tell you something. And one thing I've experienced has been this cumulative effect of health. Every month has just been a little bit better. Where you guys have been on this plant-based diet for a longer period of time, I have to ask, does this stop? Do you ever stop do you reach a plateau at any point? Obviously, the plateau is going to be a pretty high point, but is there anything, you know, you feel like is holding you back health-wise now, or anything that you feel the plant-based diet hasn't really, you know, taken care of in some way?
Yeah, health-wise, I don't know. Friends of mine will claim that they've never even gotten a cold, you know, since going vegan, and like, I don't know, I still get colds all the time, but like, I got a lot of stress in my life, so you know. But in terms of plateauing, I think there's like a health plateau and there's also a pleasure plateau. And that's why I've really strived to exploring more in the kitchen and really like working hard to extract some pretty, you know, awesome deep flavors out of a plant-based diet.
For me, I've actually only been sick once, and when it happened, I was like completely in denial. You do still get sick, obviously, but it just doesn't feel the same way. That sort of like horrible feeling of congestion that you used to get when you used to consume dairy. When I used to consume dairy, to compare to now, it's like it's just incomparable. And I notice other people getting sick, and I just like float on by and continue with my life. And even if I do get sick, it's like for 2 days. So definitely in terms of health. I always say that the only thing that I regret about going sort of vegan and plant-based is that I didn't do it earlier. And I should say that the group that I run is very whole food plant-based. So it's like I don't consume any oil, salt, or sugar at home at all. When I go out, I do really love to just explore vegan food generally. That's maybe less healthy because it's more creative and it's interesting. At home, I keep it pretty simple. And the other thing for me in terms of health is probably that something about going vegan. People say that it's boring. That's a misconception people have. And it cannot be further from the truth. Like, I have never experienced more flavor and more texture than when I've gone vegan, really, because it forces you to explore food in a way that you didn't before and really tap into the sort of potential that vegetables and fruits have, and grains and things like that. The only thing is that, yeah, I tend to overeat, I think, a little bit just because the food is so good. That's the only thing. And people have told me that if you're vegan for more than a year, eventually you get to a point where you're not as excited about the food, but I haven't got there. I mean, every time I make sweet potatoes, I think about the day that I'll be dead and I won't be able to eat sweet potatoes, and it's very sad. So
damn shame. Yeah. I always overate. I overate when I was still like eating baby back ribs. But I still overeat now. And, you know, Nina and I have talked about the differences in our diet, and they're really vast. Like, I love sugar, oil, and salt. But I don't use them in excess. And the only really kind of like, a lot of the only fat that I'm getting is what I'm actually consciously adding to my meal. It's not hidden in all the dairy products and meat products I've been eating. So I can still be totally conscious and clear about the exact amount that I'm adding to my food. And I can toy with that amount, as opposed to just like eating 70% of my daily cholesterol in one egg as a byproduct of me trying to get that protein. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
speaking of clear conscience, Matt's sitting here with like perfect skin and good conscience. So it works well. It works well.
You know, it's interesting. I was in the no oil camp for about a year, and you know, I started looking into it, and I think moderate amounts, moderation for the cooking is key. I don't believe moderation, everything in moderation is a good phrase. I think that's kind of misused in a lot of dietary advice. But as far as adding a tablespoon of real extra virgin olive oil to your cooking, I'm more open to that now, especially because it's going to add flavor. It's going to satiate a lot of people. It's going to make the plant-based diet more approachable to the general public. And I think that's a big part of our mission is to, you know, show this diet isn't restrictive. It can be fun as long as, you know, you have some guidance from the very get-go.
Yeah, that's right. I think approachability is key, and you got to make whatever changes you're adding to your life. When you're trying to be more environmentally sustainable, you got to be more psychologically sustainable. You have to do something that's still fun for you to try and get into a little more each and every day.
All right, so let's talk food specifics. All right, we've talked about how great a lot of these foods are. Let's get into it. So if you guys could have one meal, 3-course meal with absolutely no limitations at all, consider it, you know, the last great meal you'll ever have, what would it consist of?
Well, so I do so much cooking on my own every day, and so I basically live that life already for myself, and I love it. Because of that, I love it when friends cook for me, or I love it when chefs cook for me. And honestly, I would probably just like go down to Philly and have like Rich Landau and Kate Jacoby make me a 3-course meal and have no input as to what that's going to be, because they are some of the best cooks in the country.
I completely agree. I've had some most amazing food, especially in Israel at the restaurant Miss Kaplan. That's Ori Shavit's restaurant in Israel. But in terms of if I really had to choose the food that I love, it would definitely include sweet potatoes, Japanese sweet potatoes in particular. I just feel like they honestly just cut them in half, put them in the oven, and they taste like cake. Like, they taste amazing. Probably some version of, you know, dates and nut butter and banana ice cream and arugula, and I don't know, just what I mean, I don't know, they're just so good. Sushi. Yeah, so nice cream is basically just spotty bananas, so overripe, sort of ripe bananas that are very, very sugarful, that you freeze in the freezer, and then you just basically process them through a food processor or Vitamix or a juicer, and it tastes like heaven. I had it for lunch today. It was amazing.
All right, so like I feel like I'm getting some looks of disapproval from Danny here from not actually describing some food, and I'm just going to break down what I've been eating a lot of lately, which is I have so much extra produce to use up that I can, and it's so good quality this time of year because I'm getting it locally from farmers markets. So I will make my own homemade hummus, put it on some rustic sourdough toast, and cover it with just like shredded julienne sliced local veggies, and douse it with some balsamic vinegar. And that's so awesome because you're getting those those deep, rich garlic flavors. You're getting all the freshness and the crunch of local produce. And then you're having this really kind of like heady, pungent acidity from that balsamic vinegar. And God, it's just such a perfect combination. Even though I cook things on a regular basis that are so much more involved and like making my own sauces, man, some hummus with veggies and balsamic vinegar, it hasn't gotten any better than that for me recently. And for dessert, it's really simple too. It's like almond or coconut ice cream with some raspberries or strawberries on top of it, and homemade chocolate ganache, which that sounds involved, but all it is you take a bag of chocolate chips and you melt a little bit of soy or almond milk into it, and it basically turns into hot fudge. It's like magic, and I love it.
We're all literally sitting around and about to have a potluck after this, so we're all thinking about the food we're about to eat.
Yeah, this is definitely good timing having this conversation because I'm getting hungry having it. So you guys are obviously pretty busy, PhD students at Harvard. It's not like you're sitting around just preparing plant-based foods all day. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people underestimate is how much you can do even when you're busy. So how would you describe your meals on the go? What advice would you have for people who are busy who want to start undertaking this lifestyle?
My first two pieces of advice are like explore your Asian restaurants, because they're always going to have vegetarian options on the menu that are almost entirely vegan unless there's like some eggs in them. Dairy doesn't play a huge role in Southeast Asia. And then, just exploring the cuisines of other countries, native cuisines of other countries that aren't America or Europe, are going to have awesome things. Like I tried my first Ethiopian food shortly after going vegetarian, and man, that was revelatory. So, exploring the tofu options at your local takeout joint, or exploring the vegetable options at your local takeout joint, and just making those changes, as well as things like, eating some more of your meals on toast or eating oatmeal or whatever's easier for you. It's all about taking what you love and just starting to dial that up and explore a little bit more, as opposed to like cooking a whole 3-course meal for yourself. But that can be an awesome venture too. So the other recommendation that I would have is to check out 2 of my favorite vegan chefs in the world. Isa Chandra Moskowitz, who's been writing cookbooks for like 10 years now, and a relatively new person on the scene who's now opening up her own restaurants called By Chloe, and her name is Chloe Coscarelli. They are 2 of the best vegan chefs in the country and are so approachable for a newcomer trying to make meals that are as simple as they are delicious.
As for me, I tend to keep things very, very simple. So I do, I go to the office every single day to work, and literally it takes me less than an hour to prepare food for the entire week in terms of lunches. So I do recommend having like, basics in the kitchen, like basic tools. I think the only 2 things that you really need is a relatively good food processor. And I really love the Instapot. That's actually made my life very, very easy, because literally I just I cook some kind of grain. So it's like rice or some kind of grain, and then literally canned beans, and then just whatever vegetables I have, and I just literally cut it up and mix it up, and that's my lunch for the entire week, which is fine. And then in the morning, I usually just have fruit or oatmeal, and then at night when I come home, like maybe I'll do something a little bit more involved, but nothing that crazy day to day. I find like when people say that it takes too long to eat plant-based food, I'm always like surprised, because I feel like it's the quickest, the easiest food to make. And also, I should also say that I had a friend once who asked me like, what's a really easy thing that I can get that's like takes me 10 minutes to get in the middle of the day when I have a really busy day at work? And I say, literally go to the store and buy a bunch of bananas and eat those bananas. Like that can be a lunch that people don't realize is a lunch if you're really on the go. Like I always say, the fruit is nature's fast food. So just don't forget fruit.
Nuts too. Nuts are awesome because, they're packed with protein and good fat. If you need something a little more substantial, like I tend to. So I eat like a fiendish amount of cashews, and with salt and pepper on them. Like Emerald makes these salt and pepper cashews that are just like straight up addictive, but they're not actually bad for you. There's nuts are, despite the fact that they're really energy rich, so people are worried about all the excess calories, there have been a lot of studies about nuts that are shown that they actually certain proteins in them, including arginine, tend to dial up your resting metabolism. What your resting metabolism means the amount of calories you're burning through by just sitting there, the heat that you generate and the carbon dioxide that you breathe out of your mouth. Good plant-based foods dial that up for you, versus if you're ever feeling that feeling of eating sluggish from eating like too much dairy, too much meat, part of that could be that your resting metabolism is just straight up getting slower. That's why, I'm 31 right now and I don't feel like my metabolism is slowing down, versus I think a lot of people when they hit 30, they're like, man, I'm not eating as much. I'm sleeping all the time. I never want to stay out late. So, yeah, that was a little bit tangential because I was just talking about nuts, but nuts are awesome. Eat a lot more of them and stick them in the toaster because it elevates their savoriness to like unprecedented levels. It's like sticking bread in the oven, turning it into toast. It's like a whole new food. Toasted nuts, toasted seeds, man, they'll get you there.
I think it's interesting because a lot of people grew up on the belief that it was calories in versus calories out. And, obviously there's a lot more to nutrition. There's a lot more to weight loss and good health than just calories in, calories out. And one of the reasons is the energy density of food and, what your resting metabolic rate is. And I think that's a great point. I think it's a great point that a lot of these plant-based foods can stimulate your metabolism well after you've eaten them. So it's not just about, the sheer number of calories you're eating. It's not just about, how much you're burning at the gym or on the treadmill. A lot of it does have to do with the totality of your lifestyle, and that's what makes this plant-based lifestyle so great. It becomes a big part of your life.
Just to add something really quick, one thing I definitely noticed being on a plant-based diet compared to before is we mentioned overeating because we just love the food so much and stuff like that. I mean, it's crazy because it's just a feeling that you get when you, let's say you ate a lot for dinner and the next day you wake up and you feel still full from the night before. It's just not the same. Like when you eat plant-based food, and especially when it's whole, when you wake up the next morning, it just doesn't have the same kind of impact on you. Like it just kind of, you're over full in one moment, but like a few hours later, you just kind of go back to normal. And so I really, really think this kind of overemphasis on calories in our society is extremely sad because people start cutting corners and eating things that are bad for their body essentially and starving their body. And I actually think that it's like really a kind of pernicious form of inequality. I think women in particular are tend to do this. I think men do as well, but men are constantly concerned about gaining muscle and so on, and there's so many vegan athletes that have shown that that's not at all an issue, that this protein obsession is crazy. But also for women who are kind of like constantly, I think like for women it can be very freeing to have this kind of diet where they can eat it and it's they can eat to their satiation and actually like feed their bodies and their brains, we should also mention, because I think that's a huge sort of, in a sense, source of inequality. Women are constantly underfed. They don't have enough energy to kind of see the world with. And so when you eat a plant-based diet, you're actually able to eat until you're satiated and you've nourished your body, and you can still stay slim and strong and just have a healthy body that's not sort of you're not constantly thinking about food as this so I don't know, I think it's really important in that sense.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that 100%. Like, no one wants to feel at war with their own body or their own diet, and it's just not fun to eat and either feeling like you're always hungry or you just had a hangover from the meal you just consumed. And that was a big thing for me in my college years. It just being revelatory that I can eat until I'm full and then be happy. That's such a simple basis for eating, and so contrary to how most Americans eat. It's like how Louis C.K. he's like, says like a lot of people eat until they're full. I eat until I hate myself. I get that. And I've had that feeling, and I don't really do that. And it's great.
Yeah, so a lot of people see plant-based diets as restrictive, and I actually think it's the exact opposite, because when you draw a fine line between like whether it's for morals or for ethics or for environment or for health, when you draw that line between like these are foods that I consume because they're good for my body and good for the planet and so on versus not, then you have this universe of things that you can eat, and they all, they're all contributing to a whole well-being that's not just about you, and it's not just about the sort of, people call it selfish. I think it's very important to be healthy, and I think it's a huge problem that we have in the US, especially in terms of health. So I don't think it's selfish to be sort of very health centered, but also the sort of like other benefits of it are amazing. So I just think it's a win-win all around.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I do think this is one of the best things you can do for your body, for the environment. It's just, there are so many benefits to it, and it really all it takes is just having the right guidance, knowing which foods to eat, which foods aren't going to be boring. And I think a big part of that just comes down to hooking up with, other like-minded people who have had experience, people who have been on this diet for 12 years, however many years you've been on, Nina. One thing you guys were talking about was just how you don't have that lethargic feeling after you eat anymore. And I think it's almost night and day. Before, when I used to eat, I would have awful blood sugar crashes every day from 12 to 2 after eating lunch. I was a zombie. I'd walk around my office and I barely functioning. But now when I eat, it's energy. I feel good after I eat, and I think that's such a huge difference. And when people experience that for the first time, they don't want to go back to feeling the other way. I want to talk about a few side projects you guys have. Nina, you started Boston Plant-Based Millenials, and Matt, you have a very popular, I guess, food Instagram page, I should say. I don't know how else to describe it. So let's talk a little bit about that. Nina, what gave you the inspiration to start Boston Plant-Based Millenials, and how have you seen this group develop since you started it?
So Danny, I've actually been vegan for a year, and when I turned vegan, I was actually in France, which is like a very interesting place to go vegan because the contrast between my decision and the environment was palpable. And when I came back to Harvard, it occurred to me that I actually didn't know anybody who was vegan at all. And so I started kind of exploring, and I wanted to see if Harvard had any vegan groups, and it turned out it didn't really. So the first person who is vegan who I met is sitting right next to me. This is Matt, and you'd think we would have met at Harvard through some vegan venture, and that's not at all how we met. Actually, we met at a grocery store, and I'm Market Basket in Somerville, and if you live in Cambridge, you know what I'm talking about. So this is like, and there's also like a Wednesday morning. It was a very random time to go to the grocery store, but anyway, I was at this grocery store, and I was going to cook this meal for my birthday, actually. I had 12 people coming over. So I was going to make pumpkin soup served in pumpkin. So you kind of cut out the pumpkin and then you put the soup inside. So I was standing in line, and this guy starts talking to me, and he says, "What are you going to make with those pumpkins?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I'm going to make the soup." And he starts saying, give me all this advice about it. And I was like, who does this guy think he is? He's not even vegan. So I said, "Oh, thanks for your advice. But actually," I mean, he seemed nice, but I was like, well, he's going to give me some advice that's not vegan. That's not going to be very useful. And I said, "You know what? I'm actually vegan." And he's like, "No way. So am I." So that was Matt. That's how we met. Matt, you can talk a little bit about our story later. But anyway, he was the first person who I met. But I wanted to meet other people. So I actually at the time, just by chance, T. Colin Campbell, who is the author who I mentioned earlier, who wrote the China Study, he was in town to give a talk. And I went there, and they were screening Plant Pure Nation, which is a documentary that I really encourage everybody to check out. It kind of piggybacks on Forks Over Knives, which is a really good documentary to watch, sort of advocating for the health reasons to go vegan. And they had a call there. They said, you should start a Plant Pure pod if this is really a passion of yours. So I decided to start one with people that I had met volunteering that year with the Boston Vegetarian Festival. And so we literally started with 4 people, and then I invited Matt, and then slowly but surely every month we've had a potluck, and it's grown from the first meeting where I think there were 3 people to now there are over 300 members on Facebook, and potlucks have gone up to about 30 people per potluck, which is pretty great. And now that we've started Harvard Vegan Society, I think a lot more people are going to join also. So this group has been really a lifesaver for me and for a lot of people who've joined it, because I think that I started it, I called it plant-based because I want to emphasize the health aspect of veganism, in addition to the other motivations. But I also wanted to be millennials, even though it's open to anybody. And we've had a person who came, who's 90, who I ran into on the street yesterday protesting and the vegan cause. So yeah, so George, yeah, he's great. Call out to George. So, but anyway, it's mostly younger people. And I really wanted it to appeal to people who have come, are motivated by different reasons, but have this sort of common thread. And I wanted to be people from not just Harvard, but across Boston. And I've made the most amazing friends, and it's a little bit sad to talk about it today, because one of the really great friends that I met through it, Daniela, she's actually leaving us tomorrow to go back to Germany, but she's going to Berlin. So I'm not super sad, because she's going to like the vegan heaven of the world. It's the Mecca. And so through it, it's been a year, so it's a little bit like our anniversary a little bit today, celebrating this group. And I can't even express what I've gotten through it. Like, not only have I made amazing friends, like I literally feel like I have 12 best friends who are vegan now. But, you know, it's led to amazing opportunities like, you know, even just doing this podcast today, like I would never happened if I didn't start this group. And then getting the impetus to, you know, to start the Harvard Vegan Society, to do this research that's related to veganism. And, you know, influencing my parents because they've seen how I've started this group and what it's done. And so it's just been an amazing source. And, you know, all the like amazing dinners that we've had within the Pollocks, outside of them, just amazing memories. I'm just really, really, really happy that I started this group and that I brought all these people together. Most of them have been around for way longer than I have in this vegan scene. And it's really just inspiring to get to know them and yeah, to work with them.
Amazing feelings all around. Yeah, it's been great, and I thank Nina so much for getting this group started because you know, Boston's a really transient city and people come in and out of it. And having been here working on my PhD this whole time, which is always a long haul, you know, you're creating, you know, a dissertation of research and findings that no one's ever tried or accomplished before in a PhD program, and that can be a really real challenge, and you need to be able to reach out to other people, and you need to have community while you're doing that, especially if, you know, you're trying to embark in a more kind of healthy and sustainable way of and responsible way of eating. So, you know, based on what you said, Danny, and based on what you said, Nina, I think community is so important whenever you're making a big lifestyle change, you know, including starting to eat more vegan or going fully vegan. And I was lucky enough to have that when I was coming up in like the Washington, D.C. area punk and hardcore scene. That was kind of like an early pocket of veganism. I mean, like bands like Gorilla Biscuits in the New York hardcore scene in 1989 called Cats and Dogs, you know, about how cats and dogs have all the luck because they're not treated like chickens, pigs, and cows, even though they're just as freaking intelligent. So it was really awesome to have that community around the music that I enjoyed and the kind of counterculture and rebelliousness to a certain extent. And we, just like in the Boston Plant-Based Millenials now, 12 years ago, we're having potlucks and going out to restaurants together and exploring new options in a way that would make it so much, it would have been so much harder if I didn't have that community. So it's awesome to be to come from that community all the way back from when I was a teenager, and to be able to pay that forward, like with my friendship with Nina and meeting new people like you, Danny, and with participating in the Boston Plant-Based Millennial, and to getting a real viable kind of cross-campus community. It's a lot of alliteration there at Harvard in the form of the Harvard Vegan Society. So it feels really good to finally get this rolling, despite the fact that I'm on my way out.
I know you're on Instagram now. Was that a MySpace group back then? Was that kind of how you got started?
Let's not talk about the MySpace years. Yeah, I mean, definitely there's a lot of stuff going on through Facebook. Back then, God, I think I was even starting in the days of Friendster. But no, these were like people who I had, you know, grown up with in high school, and even but before that, like we just, you know, we were kind of like somewhat freaks and losers and skateboarders, and like, you know, to a certain extent. And the counterculture of the DC area punk scene just spoke to a lot of us for a lot of different reasons. And, you know, I always appreciated the punk scene because, like, you know, it was basically a certain amount of the angst that came from it told us you don't have to live your life the crappy and mediocre way that things are right now. You know, that through getting really loud and angry about things, you can actually affect positive change. And I came from a long line of tradition in DC of affecting positive change through loud and aggressive music and the community that came through that. So, like, God, I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, I still want to make positive change more accessible for other people. So that's still what I'm trying to do and still what I'm about.
And this community element, I have a friend, Dan, in the group. They're all named Dan, by the way, in the group. But anyway, but he always says that I get this kind of like emotional high when I see the group kind of doing its thing, just bringing amazing food together, which I know is about to happen. And he calls it vegan glee, which is just amazing. It's just awesome to be able to go to a friend's house and say like, oh, the sushi that you made is amazing. Where'd you get that rice? And then your friend just gives you like a bag of rice to take home with you. It's just like nice to have people who have these, like, who share interests and just, you know, rice and fruit and, you know, share things. And it's just, yeah, it's really, really nice. And we're really lucky to have it.
I think a lot of people in the past have been kind of turned off by a lot of overzealous vegans, and that was me. I remember I went to Emerson College in Boston. It was the vegans I knew there. I thought they were crazy, to be entirely honest. But I think what I'm seeing more now are people who are just more open-minded about everything. That they're more accepting of people who aren't exactly following their way of eating and living, and they're more, I guess, helpful in helping people get on that path. And I think groups like these are absolutely the way to go.
And actually, to be honest, I think people should just start their own. If the crowd is not what you subscribe to or you don't feel comfortable in, then start your own group with the kinds of people you want to hang out with. Like, I think that's kind of what I did, because I didn't really know any other groups in Boston that were vegan that to be honest, I've only been vegan for a year, and I was very much one of those vegetarians that thought vegans were crazy, and that that I didn't want to be vegan because it wasn't the association that I really wanted to have with myself, I guess. So I think the perception of vegans is definitely changing, but I think it's really important to be a vegan that's kind of open to anybody who's interested. Like, people have joined, as Matt mentioned, Harvard Vegan Society that aren't vegan. And I'm like almost even more excited about the people who aren't vegan who are joining, because they're interested in it. Like, that's the most important thing, is that people are open to it. So even if they're doing it, baby steps at a time, like, I think I'm all for that.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own starting points, right? And, despite the fact that I went vegan at a younger age, being 19 at the time, I knew that it was the right thing to do since I was in 7th grade, and I was tasked with, like, debating vegetarianism in my biology class, and I was like, oh crap, I think there's something about this. But I still was eating bacon for like another few years after that. So everyone has their own starting points, and everyone's going to have like a certain level of curiosity or defensiveness about this. And so I think the best thing you can do is just let people know that you're feeling awesome and that it's a totally attainable position to get to eventually. And any baby steps somebody can take along the way of like cutting meat and dairy out of their diet and their life, and finding community that are really going to allow them and encourage and support them to do it and kind of accelerate that progress, is just a great thing.
So where can people get in touch with you guys? I know, Matt, you have a very popular Instagram page. Nina, I know you're working on a lot of different projects. Where can people follow what you guys are doing and get in touch if they're so inclined?
Yeah, so I think the best way to get in touch with me is actually through my Instagram page. If anyone wants to check that out, I'm totally welcome to direct messages. And my Instagram is HeyMatt, just HeyMatt. And you can find me on Instagram on that platform.
I also have an Instagram account, not as popular as Matt's. It's Girl from Moldavina. So Girl from Moldavina, Moldivina. And also, if you just Google literally Nina Harvard Sociology, you will find me as well. So you can email me at Harvard too.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat there. I gave a presentation back in 2012. I think I just heard the doorbell because Nina's inviting some guests over for a potluck. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I'm down to have the doorbell in this podcast. Like, we're actually, putting our money where our mouth is. And yeah, if you Google Matt Hayek Harvard, you'll see a talk that I gave in 2012 called The Empirical Case for a Plant-Based Diet. Basically, it's about the science of veganism. And I start out talking about the environmentalism and all the science that allows us to know about how unsustainable livestock agriculture and meat and dairy are, and how sustainable, conversely, eating more plants is. And then I go on to talk about the actual animal behavioral science that shows us that, a pig that we're used to eating is just, if not more so, intelligent than your dog. And then go on further to show how all of the clinical nutrition studies say that we can't just survive on this diet, we can actually thrive. So check that talk out, and my email should be at the bottom of it. If it's not, it's mhayek, MHAYEK, at seas.harvard.edu.
Guys, thank you so much for coming on today. This is another episode of the Nature Has Flavor podcast. I'm Danny Horgan. We'll see you guys next week.